Welcome to Handmade Happenings. I'm Melissa. Today I'm talking about what to look for when buying your first sewing machine. Now I'm going to give you the long answer first, which will be looking at the machine and kind of what features I consider necessary for a first sewing machine, and then I will give you the short answer of exactly what I would do if looking for a sewing machine for a beginner, and in fact what I did when we got this sewing machine for my niece. Let's start by talking about the stitch capabilities of a machine. The two stitches that you definitely want your machine to have are a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch, and the ability to adjust the length of your straight stitch and the width of your zigzag stitch. This machine here on the knob, which is how you adjust your stitches, has 4 or 5 different straight stitches, and the difference between them is the length. And then it has the same for the zigzag stitches, and the difference between those is the width of them. Beyond that, sometimes it's nice to have a buttonhole, especially if you're going to try and do garments for children and things. There's a lot of sewing of buttonholes in those types of things. Pretty much anything else I personally don't use even now. I might use a couple of decorative stitches, but straight and zigzag are the primary things I use. The buttonhole is a nice bonus, but not totally necessary. Hand-sewn buttonholes are really easy. Now, how you select your stitches is also going to come into play here. This machine, as I said, has one knob, and you just select your stitch kind of based on what you need. You know, do I need a really long straight stitch, or do I need a shorter one, or something in between? The machines that are a step up from this one have 3 knobs. So it will have the one to select your stitch, the one that will adjust your stitch length, and one to adjust your stitch width when doing a zigzag or some of the other stitches. Both are good for beginners. It does kind of depend on if you are like completely new to sewing, never used a machine before, or if you at least have had some experience working on a machine, say a friend who has taught you a few things on theirs, or a class that you've taken. If you have some experience and know that sewing is something you're going to keep doing, then I go ahead and go with the one with the 3 different dials to adjust your stitches, just because you have a little more room to grow with that than you necessarily do with this one, where you have slightly less control of what's going on. However, if you heard the whole thing about 3 dials and that was completely overwhelming, then the one with the single dial is a good place to start, and you will be able to do quite a bit with it. Next, you want to consider the presser foot. Does it come off, which this one does? And does the machine come with any more? And this one came with, I believe it's 3 different ones. It came with the one that lets you sew buttons on with your machine, the one for buttonholes, and the one for a zipper foot. And as far as I know, as long as your foot is removable, you can add on, like buy other feet that will fit your machine. You'll just have to do a bit of research on what foot that would be based on the brand and things like that. The next thing to consider is how the bobbin is inserted. There are 2 options for this. There's a top loading bobbin and a front loading bobbin. Now, the top loading is what this is right here. You remove this piece, that's just the cover, and the bobbin just drops straight in. And in my opinion, this is the easiest. With the front loading bobbin, you have to remove this piece, and then there's a cover underneath that you have to pull down, and then there's like a bobbin case that you have to pull out, and you put the bobbin in and you put it all back in, pull the thread up to the top before you can close the front of the machine. To me, that is a little complicated, so I do prefer the top loading ones. So most machines do use the top loading mainly now, I think. There's a couple that I have seen that are new that still do the front loading for some reason. It's mostly something I've seen in older machines, so that's more something to look out for if you decide to maybe go the route of looking for a used one. Another thing I want to point out about this machine is that it is a mechanical machine and not a computerized one. So when I say that, I just mean this is everything set manually. You have dials that you turn. Computerized machines will have a screen on it and either buttons or a touch screen. It depends on the machine. and you set your stitches and everything that way. Now, I've never used one. I tend to not really want to have a computer added to things if it doesn't need it, because to me that's just something else that can break. And while I do know there are a lot of people who like computerized machines, I would say to stay away from that starting out, because it is going to drive up the price point. Now let's talk about price. Obviously, if you are willing to buy a used one, that can cause quite a range in prices. I'm really only going to focus on buying a new machine because that's what I can give you definite numbers about. So from what I've seen doing my research for this video, a machine like this with just the single knob, you should still be able to get one for under $100. And the absolute most that I would say to spend is between $140 and $150. And that's really only if you're going to get one that has the 3 different dials to set your stitch, length and width and which stitch you're using. So basically under 100 if you're going for the single dial, no more than 150 if you're going for the one with 3 knobs. I think the one that I'm thinking of is around 140 though. So that was the long answer. I did promise you the short answer, which is I would go to Walmart and look at their craft section for their basic machines and pick the one that was in my preferred budget, either the under $100 for one with just the single knob, or the one that is, about $120 to $140 for one with the 3 dials. I will note that if you're buying these online, you want to make sure that it is coming directly from Walmart. Typically, the machines that are in that price range with these features are either a Brother or a Singer brand, and those are both very good beginner machines. And you may be wondering why I say Walmart compared to, say, a craft store. And that is because, first off, Walmart is a bit more convenient than most craft stores. And they also tend to be a bit better on the pricing. So when I was researching for this video, I found out that Michaels has a Brother sewing machine with the single dial for setting your stitches with 17 stitches, which is what this one has. So basically the same machine. I think it has a different model number, and Michaels sells it for, I think it's like around $130, which is quite a difference in price for what is essentially, from what I can tell, the same machine. And that is my list of things to look for when buying your first machine, and in a lot of ways what I consider when buying any sewing machine, because even the ones I have now have most of the features that I talked about today. The main difference is that now I buy ones that are meant to be kind of cleaned and serviced and repaired more so than the ones that I talked about here today. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will do my best to answer them, and I hope you will join me next time for another Handmade Happening.